G'day, Ginger. My name is Victor Ratman, and today I'm going to be looking at your piece that you posted up, your first chapter. I don't think it has a title. No, it's just called Chapter 1 with a question mark. So today I'm going to be trying to giving you some feedback to improve this piece, and ultimately I want to focus on some things that you can take into all your work, not just improving this chapter. Okay? So a few things quickly about myself. I'm not a professional writer. I've written a few novels over my 12-year career. They're okay, but this advice is not coming from someone that is professional in any means. So please make sure when you take on this feedback that you kind of reflect on it within yourself and make sure that the feedback that I'm giving you does work for you. That's incredibly important. But also, I just want to tell you that the reason I do these videos is I believe that when we take feedback as writers, especially when we're on things like Discord or forums or something, it can be very daunting when we request feedback. And what we get in return is a massive bullet point list of things that need to be improved. And I think for me personally, and I don't know if you find this as well, it can be so overwhelming to the point that we don't actually feel like we can implement all of those things. It loses the effect because you get stuck in a point of being overwhelmed. So I just want to focus on a few key things that kind of jumped out at me here. There's a lot that I could go through, but I think these are the biggest areas that you need to focus on to produce much higher quality prose. So getting into it, reading through your chapter, what instantly jumps out to me is a technical piece of feedback. When reading your piece, I actually stopped halfway through, and then I went back to the beginning. I started reading it out loud, and I realized something in that I find it very unlikely that you read this out loud to yourself, because there's a lot of sentences that are structured in a way they're just awkward to say, and something that not every writer really knows is that when they're awkward to say out loud, they're awkward to say in your head. Because the way you read things, you emulate speech in your head, okay? It's what gives writers such as Tolkien or Faulkner or any of these great writers that have these poetic kind of roll-on, voices. They've mastered the ability to kind of have that speech to mind speech connection. And the easiest way to do it is to read it out loud. It's the most important piece of editorial feedback that anyone can be given on any stage of their writing journey, is that you must read this out loud. You would be amazed the things that come back to you when you read things out loud. Sentences that appear completely fantastic, down on the page, you will read and realize, oh no, that actually feels a bit janky when you put it with the rest of the paragraph. When reading out loud, don't just look for technical things. Also look for the way that you're guiding the information to the reader. And this kind of brings me to my next point, is that a small example of this is in your first two paragraphs, but you repeat this a lot. So this is something that you do a lot. But I just want to focus on these first two paragraphs because it is the easiest example. So the first two paragraphs go like this. It was a cold day. The flowers of spring were slowly withering away, and the leaves were slowly becoming rusty in color. Despite the cold, the sky was still blue, with the sun hidden behind some clouds. For some, it would be a good day to sit by the fireplace with a good book, or wrap up warm and go on a small walk. However, this wasn't the case for others. What you've done here, okay, is you've basically... The first two lines are irrelevant. They don't add anything to the story. It's especially taboo to start any story with the weather at an extreme length. But even if you were, you could seriously just start with the second paragraph. It's the reader is not interested in that kind of flavorful imagery right off the bat, and it's basically an example in you paint a picture, and then in the next paragraph you paint the picture kind of in a much more minimalist way, and that's the way that you should be doing it. Because I think you as a writer, the way that you're approaching this is that you have the idea in your head and you go, okay, this is the way that the scene looks, I'm going to write that out. Now I know how the scene looks, now I can write in the scene. And it's when you actually find yourself writing in the scene that you're producing much better content. And, you know, I would urge you to go through and see where you're kind of getting off track. The first 2 lines, perfect example. It's not bad to paint a picture. Don't get me wrong. This piece of advice is not meant for you to go, oh, shit, I shouldn't, you know, drone on about the weather or anything like that. No, it's perfectly fine to have great parts of imagery in your work. But the reader, you have to imagine the reader is kind of a hamster brain, lack of attention. Like, getting the reader engaged in your work, especially in the beginning, but really in the whole book, is a constant game of cat and mouse. You as the writer have to constantly be going, no, don't worry, I did explain the weather, but there's something interesting going on. Just stay with me, okay? Stay with me, get through that. That's the way you should look at it. If I was you, honestly, I would start with the 3rd paragraph. I would make very brief mention of the weather, and this brings me on to my 3rd and final point. So, just to reiterate, the first point is, oh shit, I've forgotten in my rambles. First point is make sure to read out loud to yourself. That will give you a much better editorial process and it will fix up a lot of these janky sentences. The second thing is try to see where you're running off with imagery and try to see where you're putting unnecessary imagery. And my 3rd point is make the story much less about telling us what's going on and much more about showing. And it's an age-old piece of feedback, isn't it? Show, don't tell. You know what I mean? Every writer that's decided to learn how to write has heard this piece of feedback. But the way I want to explain it to you, other than I do urge you to Google show, don't tell and try and understand the rule in your head. I won't explain it to you here because there's much more intelligent people out there can get a grasp on it. But try to ground the way that you're telling the story within the character, okay? Try to get it grounded in the character. The way this reads is the narrator kind of is sitting so far above Victor Rivers. You know what I mean? It's you don't feel like you're in Victor's head. You just feel like he's there. And whilst that is kind of the point of 3rd person omnipresent, you know what I mean? It's also not the way people read stories. People want to read characters. If I could give you any advice, it would be to mention Victor. Don't use his full name, although it is actually acceptable to use his full name in the beginning. You know what I mean? It is, you know, before you start just calling him Victor Rivers in the very beginning is actually what a lot of very good writers do. So ignore that. By all means, call him Victor Rivers, but ground it in what he's thinking, what he's feeling. Instead of explaining that it's a cold day and the flowers of spring were slowly withering away, say that Victor pulled his coat tight, the chill of the air bit into him, you know what I mean? He watched as one spring leaf fell off a tree and dashed away. Try to ground it in what he's seeing and what he's experiencing, because ultimately, that's what the reader cares about. Now, like I said, there is a lot more things that I could tell you, but I just want you to focus on those 3 things today, okay? Because I don't want to make a 20-minute video that, you know, you just kind of blow off and don't enjoy. If you have any questions, by all means, reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I would urge you to look at this piece, work with it, you know, and, yeah, tell me how you go. You know what I mean? Good luck, and I hope I gave you something that can work.